Before we get started, I just wanted to mention if you go to newtfilm.com, which is, and you click on buy or rent, you can, if you haven't seen the movie Love Notes to Newton, you can rent it currently right now with the discount code Poutine. And I'll put the spelling down. I think everyone probably knows, but I'll put the spelling in the chat just in case. So there's free rentals right now for that.
Highly recommended.
Well, since you're in it, Matthias,
You can cut that part out, but the rest is
that's
really cool.
yeah. Good. Well, I'm glad people enjoy the film. It was a pleasure to make, and it was a pleasure to meet everybody who was in it. Um, okay, so the thing that I want to talk about today is, oh no, it's the slide showing on the wrong screen here. If I bring it over here. Okay, so after I made the film, and one of the struggles I have as um, a filmmaker, and it's hard for me to call myself a filmmaker because I don't make enough money doing it, which my wife will attest to. But one of the challenges I have is getting the film out there. It's one thing that was a real pain point, just getting it in front of people who will want to watch it. Um, and I've done a couple other films with another director, and it seems to be universal that that's the problem for independent filmmakers. And so, um, one thing that I wanted to do with Love Notes, and I've wanted to do this for a while, is to break up all the interviews that I did. I have some really great interviews with people like John Scully, with Matthias, with uh, I guess who else is here that was in the film. Um, but anyway, some of these interviews, especially kind of like the more historical stuff with some of the original Newton team, some of whom is going to be here today, I wanted to break it up and put it into kind of mini documentaries, almost like a podcast. And I was trying to think of what kind of platform would be good for doing that. So wouldn't it be really nice to just have a platform and not have to worry about how to distribute these things, which I think all of you guys might be interested in, all of these historical interviews. So um, I know that I'm very interested in kind of the folklore and the history of the Newton, and there's only so much you can put in a film. So instead of doing kind of a Love Notes to Newton Part 2, I wanted to do maybe kind of a series. And then if that goes well, then to build on that. And so I was hoping to build kind of a platform for that. And I was thinking maybe I could do like a YouTube channel, or maybe I could do like an independent website. And so kind of what I decided to do, and I'm very interested in people's feedback for this, is to create kind of a streaming website and also have a YouTube channel. And the YouTube channel would be kind of like the bite-sized version of the streaming site, and it would direct people where they can go to the website and they can watch the long form interviews. If you're really interested in watching the whole 1 hour interview with John Scully, then you can do that. Um, so the domain that I registered is called Folklorg. It's focal.org, but it's you know, it's kind of like folklore, like folklore. There's already kind of a site called Folklore, which is has some really great like Apple stories on it. And so I kind of wanted to not rip that off, but kind of be in the kind of the same tradition. And the idea was kind of not just to have Newton stuff, but also to have other stories about the slogan that I came up with is the future as told by the past. And so I feel like when I made the film, Avi said something when I interviewed him that there's kind of like these alternate futures that and we're kind of sad a little bit with the Newton of what could have been if it had continued on. I feel like sometimes there's a little bit of sadness, maybe not so much anymore, because so many of our devices have almost achieved what the Newton can do in some ways, even though technically not like the enjoyable feel of the Newton. But so there's all these stories from the past of people who tried to create things and there were good things, but the timing was wrong or whatever. And so I want to kind of build a site where I can tell these stories. And that's where the Love Notes to Newton extra content comes in. I want to put it on there. Stories about people and technology. So the idea would be the subscription site, the YouTube channel, and maybe a podcast. Although this is a lot of stuff for me to do. I had hoped to have a functional website. You can go to the site right now actually and look around at its unfinished state, folklore.org. But the idea was that I would create this content, and I want to show you a little bit. It's unfinished. And honestly, I have no idea if this stuff will be interesting. So if you guys want me to stop playing it and it's really boring, then please just put up like your hand or something like that so I know, because I just want to kind of give a taste, and then I want to know from the Newton community whether this is something that you guys will enjoy, because if it is, then I'm going to put more effort into it and try to get it out there. So.
There's no
Noah,
sound.
Noah, we don't hear the sound.
Oh,
so
sorry. Hang
you
on. I
need
have to turn on the sound.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll try that again. So I hope it's not too loud. Welcome. My name is Who Really Cares, and this is a folklore presentation of Love Notes to Newton. Everybody knows Steve Jobs, but a lot of Apple's early success was actually thanks to John Scully, who ran Pepsi for a while, and then Steve famously got him to come to Apple. I was almost finished making my film, Love Notes to Newton. David Grealish got me an interview with John Scully. This was really big because John Scully was the CEO of Apple from about 1983 to 1993, 10 years-ish. Even though the budget for the film was already finished, I talked to my wife and she said, "You gotta go." And I said, "I gotta go." And so I hopped on a plane. The first thing he said to me when I came in was, "I have a hard stop in about an hour." So I had an hour to set up, conduct the interview. It's a great interview and I want to share it.
Born in New York City, grew up in New York City, and I was never interested in having toys. All I wanted were electronic parts. But my electronics days were analog electronics, and it wasn't until I came to Apple that I then had to go back and learn digital electronics. Many people think that there couldn't be two things that were further apart than Pepsi and Apple, but in reality, what attracted Steve Jobs to recruit me was that I had been made marketing vice president of Pepsi in 1970 when I was just 29 years old.
This is the taste. This is the test. Pepsi versus Coke, the Pepsi Challenge. Pepsi. And all across America, more people pick Pepsi. Time after time after time.
Pepsi-Cola.
Oh, what a time. It's gonna be Pepsi now.
We said, take the Pepsi Challenge, let your taste decide. It was all about the experience of ordinary people. So we said, we can't own reality. Coke is reality, but perception leads reality. And we said, if we can own perception, we can change the ground rules. And I called that experience marketing. And when I explained it to Steve, because eventually we passed Coca-Cola and became the largest selling consumer packaged good in the United States, he said, that's fascinating. He said, I'm building a product at Apple. It's going to come out in about a year called the
Macintosh, the computer for the rest of us.
And it's for non-technical people. And it's all about the experience of using a product if you know nothing about technology and being able to do amazing creative things. He said, you've got to come to Apple and teach me how to do experience marketing. In 1985, after Steve left, Alan Kay, who was an Apple fellow.
John mentions Alan Kay here. If you don't know Alan Kay, you should look him up. But It's basically like if you were trying to learn physics and you had Einstein as your teacher.
And Alan had been recognized as one of the true geniuses in the high-tech world. He had invented the first object-oriented programming language called Smalltalk. He had conceptualized the first personal computer called the Dynabook.
This is the Dynabook. Alan Kay invented this before computers looked like tablets, before they looked like laptops.
And Steve had recruited Alan to Apple back in the early 1980s. So Alan came to me and he said, John, he said, next time we're not going to have Xerox PARC, Palo Alto Research Center. I said, well, what do you mean?
So Doug Engelbart created the mouse and the graphical user interface. Apple, Lisa, and Macintosh perfected it. But in between, there is Xerox, Palo Alto Research Center, Xerox PARC. All the cool stuff in computers at the time was happening there.
You know, Steve got all of his inventions came from Xerox. And we have them all. So what are we going to do next? And I said, wow, so what do we do? And Alan said, well, it takes about 20 years for true innovation to percolate from invention all the way through to potentially a successful commercialized product. And as we thought about that, we said, gee, there must be a lot of really cool things that are going on in research labs now, in other places besides just Apple. I said, Alan, I don't know that much about computers. Can you take me around? And he took me to MIT, and I got to know the Media Lab and many of the amazing professors there, Marvin Minsky and Seymour Papert and a number of others. And I began what was a journey of learning not only an entirely different way of thinking about computers, even different than what Xerox had, but multimedia, interactivity, simulation, wireless, you know, all these ideas were being inspired by talented people at the MIT Media Lab. So we took those ideas, and I was writing a book a few years later, and I created this concept called the Knowledge Navigator.
Sorry guys, for some reason it stopped there. Do you want to see me to continue it?
Yeah, it's pretty
Okay.
interesting, actually.
Yes, please.
Sorry, 1 second. I'm not sure what happened.
Interesting how a guy who ran a soda company ended up becoming a CEO of Apple for a limited time. Pretty crazy when you think about it.
For sure.
And that's the
Welcome.
bad lad.
My name is...
Created this concept called the Knowledge Navigator, a different way of thinking about computers, even different than what Xerox had, but multimedia, interactivity, simulation, wireless, you know, all these ideas were being inspired by talented people at the MIT Media Lab. So we took those ideas, and I was writing a book a few years later, and I created this concept called the Knowledge Navigator.
Jill Gilbert is calling back.
Great. Put her through.
Hi, Mike. What's up?
Based on the ideas that largely that Alan Kay had inspired me by taking me to see the Media Lab, and Alan knew how to connect the dots on these things, but I knew how to market. And so I went to George Lucas and I said, George, isn't there a way we can simulate these things of what a computer could be like in 20 years? Because I didn't want people to think that Apple had lost its innovation, you know, culture that had made it so distinctive when Steve was at the company. So George Lucas said, sure, we can simulate that.
Would you like to go on to lesson 6?
No, I want to read this. The Oakland A's begin an important homestand tonight.
For me as a marketing person, getting that Knowledge Navigator video and showing what we thought could be possible within 20 years opened people's eyes that we were just at the beginning of an industry. We weren't at the middle of an industry or the end of an industry. We were at the beginning of an industry. And I took it all over the world. I even took the Knowledge Navigator video over to then the Soviet Union. I was the first citizen since Richard Nixon to go on nationwide Soviet television. And I was doing a show with Andrei Sakharov and Yevgeny Velikov, who was head of the Academy of Science in the Soviet Union, and Raul Sagdayev, who was head of the Soviet Space Agency. And we showed the Knowledge Navigator video and then talked about it. And what Gorbachev wanted, he wanted people across the Soviet Union to realize that technology was going to change the world, and that the Soviet Union needed to open their eyes and realize that there were amazing things happening in other parts of the world, and so eventually they would happen there too. The original handwriting recognition technology was developed by Stefan Patrikov. And Stefan, I met him when he was in Moscow. He'd formed a company called Paragraph, and that was the first handwriting recognition that went into Newton. Unfortunately, it wasn't good enough to be a commercial release, but at the time it's pretty inspirational that you could do any kind of character recognition, just with a freehand pen.
Regardless how many people were unhappy with handwriting recognition, nobody had not only similar, nobody had even close technology to recognize connected cursive.
It was easy to criticize the Newton's handwriting recognition, but I think that the reason people were so upset about it was mostly because they realized the incredible promise and potential that Newton had to live up to.
I didn't start Newton. It was actually started by Steve Sackerman, who worked with Jean-Louis Gasset. It was started as a project that was going to be a handheld product that would have a pen interface, touchscreen, and in those days that was pretty far out there because there really were no touchscreens, technologies that were commercially available. And the project was under development for, I guess, a couple of years before I even got involved with it. Then Steve Sackerman left. He eventually went off with Jean-Louis Gasset to found another company called B, where they were going to create a computer that was more competitive with the Macintosh. But Larry Tesler, who had been the person who actually took Steve Jobs around Xerox PARC and then eventually joined Apple and became one of the key designers of the Lisa, which was the predecessor to the Macintosh. Larry Tesler was put in charge of Newton, and that's when I got involved, because I knew Larry well. And Steve Capps was already there. I knew Steve well because he was one of the original team of the first Macintosh. And they were two amazingly creative people, Michael Chow.
And the Newton group came under a lot of fire because as a pirate group, a lot of people really didn't know what was going on there. And John Scully sent in Larry Tesler, who was then head of ATG, to look at the group and say, what's usable there? What are they doing over there? And what can we either move to ATG or take to product development? One of the goals of that investigation was to actually break up the Newton group and to move it into different places within Apple, because the thought was what they're building over there really isn't a product. Well, Larry came back and said, well, I think there's a lot of great technology there. In fact, I think you should take the Newton group and bring that Newton technology into a product. And not only that, I would like to leave my position as head of ATG and run the group.
The challenge with Newton was not the concepts or the vision or the team. The challenge was that we were just way ahead of the curve of what technology could do. Remember, there was no digital cell phones. There was no World Wide Web. Tim Berners-Lee hadn't created the World Wide Web yet. When you're doing something that's never been done before, you're always taking risks. I mean, you don't know what's going to work or not. And what Apple had became well known was the ability to tune the software to the hardware. And if you look at the hardware in the original Mac, it was a 68,000 processor. It was one that could handle floating point, which was fundamental for that type of product. And it was software and hardware that were well matched, but the reason why Steve Jobs left Apple was because he was trying to get the hardware to do more than it was really capable of for the laser printer. And it couldn't print very fast. You could do fonts, but it would take minutes to raster an entire page, even on a screen. And the market wouldn't take it seriously, and so Steve's Macintosh Office in 1985 failed. So the hardware and the software need to be synchronized, and sometimes one gets ahead of the other. And in the case of Newton, we had an amazing process architecture with the ARM. We had an amazing team developing an operating system to take advantage of it, which was really a derivative of Smalltalk and of Schema, technologies that were developed back in the early 1970s, Alan Kay being the inventor of Smalltalk. And the reality was in the early 1990s, this software wasn't powerful enough and the hardware wasn't powerful enough, and it was really going to take ultimately about 15 years for the hardware to get powerful enough to be able to do the things that you really wanted to be able to do in software. None of us were smart enough to realize it was going to take that long. We thought maybe a couple of years, maybe 5 years, but no one ever thought it was going to take 15 years because it wasn't until 2007 that the first iPhone came out. You just have to appreciate how incredibly talented the team were. I mean, these were Apple's superstars. I mean, these were people who had developed things on the Macintosh that no one thought was possible. Steve Capps, brilliant. Larry Tesler, brilliant. James Joaquin. I mean, these are incredibly talented people. Ike Nassy, who was up at 1 Kendall Square in Cambridge, where he was developing Ralph, which was the operating system. So you couldn't get a better team than we had on the Newton. So you can imagine the frustration when the product couldn't render the paragraph software successfully, and people started to make jokes about the handwriting recognition. And here you've got some of the most brilliant computer scientists ever doing breakthrough stuff that no one has ever seen before, and we're getting slammed in the press, because the handwriting recognition didn't work that well. It's just like knocking the wind out of you. All success comes out of failures. And you can easily become a victim of your own success. I mean, Microsoft and Intel were remarkably successful during the 1990s. They dominated the personal computer industry by then, but both of them missed mobile. Was it because the people weren't smart enough? I don't think so. They had very smart people at Microsoft and at Intel, but they didn't have a culture of big risk-taking. They were by then large organizations. When Apple created Macintosh, when Apple created Newton, we were still an entrepreneurial company. We were huge risk takers. People were dreamers. One of the things that Steve Jobs was particularly unique at was his ability to recruit incredibly amazing people and to inspire them to do things that they never imagined that they could do. And even after Steve left, that culture that he really created at Apple still permeated the organization. And so Newton was built by people who had been on Steve's original team, and they understood that you have to take big risks. And you're not always going to be successful, but you'll learn. The first thing in Silicon Valley when you fail is, gee, so what did you learn? And Newton is as good an example of that as anything, because what did we learn? Eventually we learned the things, Apple as an organization that led to what Steve was able to create in 2007 with the launch of the iPhone. And yet you couldn't have had the iPhone without the iPod, because the iPhone, the first one, was really an iPod with a bigger screen and a radio chip. And I think that probably the iPod is inspired in many ways by the things that we learned with Newton. What a lot of people don't realize is that the Newton was one of the most profitable products that Apple ever had at the time. Everyone said, gee, Newton failed. But Newton was also the reason why ARM ended up being a commercial product. Apple bought 43% of ARM. It was a research project that came out of Acorn, out of the UK, Herman Hauser. And it was the architecting of the ARM to be a low-powered microprocessor that could handle floating point and objects that led to the ARM becoming, now it's in about 1 billion different mobile devices. And it was sold in the past year for $32 billion. So Apple ended up actually selling their 43% of ARM for about $800 million. And after the disastrous era when Apple went and licensed the Macintosh technology, and then the company almost spiraled into bankruptcy, what kept the doors open and made the payroll was that Gil Amelio sold the 43% of ARM for $800 million and used that to keep Apple going, and to part of it was used to buy Next and bring Steve Jobs back to Apple. So there's a lot of interesting stuff that traces to foundational changes in the computer industry that all happened back with Newton. At the next CES, I was giving one of the keynotes, and I talked about the future was going to be these handheld products that would have no keyboard, that would be able to communicate wirelessly, that would have an intelligent agent inside of them, that would be able to do smart things. And I never mentioned the name Newton, but I said that this was going to be a gigantic industry, and these products would eventually be sold in the billions. And there was just like, complete incredulous response by people, particularly the press, because they said, this is ridiculous. What do you mean you're going to sell handheld products that communicate wirelessly and that don't have any keyboards, and they're going to be over $1 billion a year? And so I got beaten up badly in the press for, they said, this marketing guy is overhyping it, and this makes no sense. So it's not unusual, I think, sometimes when people are doing something completely disruptive. Remember, I didn't invent Newton, so I'm the messenger telling the story, and I was inspired by what the team was building, and I believed in it. But the market was not ready to accept that idea. And so Apple was largely criticized for making such an outlandish prediction at the Consumer Electronics Show. Well, it took years for people to take that seriously. Even when the Palm Pilot came out, which actually was a very successful product, it did not use advanced technology at all. In fact, it used an old processor architecture. And I think it was the Intel 404 that had inspired it, but it was low cost. But it came out exactly at the right time. It was a few years after Newton, and it solved a real problem, even though it was not advanced technology. What the Palm Pilot did was it said, gee, now there's these new devices called cell phones, and there's no telephone directory of cell phone telephone numbers. And now this.
All right, everybody. Thank you for watching that. I'm going to stop it there because we're starting to get into the unedited part of the video. I'd not quite finished this one, but one thing I want to mention is that I would like everybody here, as well as the people who crowdfunded, thank you, who crowdfunded the film, to be kind of on an advanced screening kind of team. I don't know if you would call it that, but I would like to offer kind of, once this site is set up, I'll give you guys free subscription access, and you can give me feedback on it, if that's okay. So I put my email address in the chat, and you can just email me if you want to be a part of that.
This is awesome, Noah. I'm really excited to see that content, and I think the other people will join to me and can say this is awesome idea for your project. So I can wait to have access.
Okay, great. One of the things about working in a vacuum a little bit and not showing anything up till now has been that I just don't know if it's any good or if people want to see it. So I'm glad to hear some feedback about that. Also, if you guys have any ideas of how it should be presented or improvements I can make on just the system that I'm going to use, that would be very helpful.
What if some of us work together to make like a little title sequence you have for each video?
Sure.
I can help with the music and even a logo. You may have seen me. I posted this on the Slack a while back, but I actually made a song entirely out of Newton sounds just by sampling. Although there's a lot of clicking in the song because I didn't have the best mic, and at the time I didn't have Audacity, helps remove the clicks. I'm not changing it because I don't want to, but if we need a title sequence, I think that could work.
Lauren, I think you're representing the younger demographic, so I'm going to be really interested in what you have to say. So for
Yeah.
sure, let me know.
Yeah, I think I'm the youngest Newton fan here. I was 15, or was I? I think I was 15 last time. And still think it's funny how I got mistaken for a 12-year-old. It's actually happened multiple times outside of this.
Okay.
Okay,
Understood.
Lauren, thank you. Let's give a chance to other people. Okay.
Yeah,
So guys,
I talk a lot.
So guys, we have a few minutes before the next presentation. So if you have a questions, just hands up, and we'll go one by one. If you want to ask Noah something about that project, feel free to ask him. No questions? Okay, Matthias, please.
I think he did the clapping hands.
Well,
Yes.
that was more clapping.
Oh,
but,
right. Okay.
No, it's,
I thought you just raised the hand.
Really cool and amazing, and yeah, it puts a different light on the stories we heard over the years, and good to know directly from the persons, the people who were actually involved, and instead of have secondhand stories. So I would love to see pretty much all the footage you have, I guess.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to do was put it out there, but also kind of tell a little bit of the story of how I got this footage. And so to make it a little bit more digestible, I think. You saw at the beginning, I was kind of involved in kind of telling my side of the story too. But later on in this particular cut, like I'm not finished doing that part yet. So it was a little bit rougher. So I'll get there. Good. So, Powell. We have a few more minutes until...
I have a question. Can I have a question?
Go
you
for it.
mentioned, I don't remember because you told me before, how many hours of the raw footage you have that you didn't include in the love notes to Newton?
Good
Roughly.
question. Well, not all of it is good footage, so you can't assume that it's all footage that you want to see.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd say that most interviews were at least an hour, and some of them went 2 or 3 hours. So I did maybe about, some of them were shorter, some of them were like 10, 20 minutes, but I did maybe about 40 interviews, and some of them were over Zoom, but a lot of them were in person. So I think that you can imagine there's probably around 40 hours of footage that might be useful.
Okay, so we have a material for another 3 movies.
Maybe, but I want it to be a different format, so
yeah,
that's why.
Yeah. All right, okay. Any other questions, guys? Or you wanna just chat about something related with that presentation? Feel free to chat. Anyone? Nothing?
What if we made a version of the website playable on Newton? Like for the interviews.
Good question. I actually tried to do that a little bit. One of the perks when we did the crowdfunding campaign was that you could get a memory card, and it would have clips from the film on it. And some people order that. Teo, did you have it there?
No, not currently in my hands, but yes,
Okay.
I had that and I used it.
Yeah,
That's
and
cool.
the quality was not amazing, but it worked. So,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just a few clips. It wasn't the whole film because it would not have been possible.